Hello, everybody. It is Sunday, September the 22nd, 2024. Interesting piece in the Financial Times this morning about the appearance of what they call a new generation of AI-powered assistants. The AI revolution, for all the noise and hype, is becoming real. We've done many shows on it recently. We did one with the Australian-based AI expert Toby Walsh, who was literally gushing about Google's new product, Notebook LM. And we are back on the AI track again today in a positive sense with my guest, Anindya Ghose. He's a very distinguished professor of business at New York University and the co-author of a book which is extremely optimistic about AI. It's called Thrive, Maximizing Wellbeing in the Age of AI. He wrote it with his colleague, Ravi Bhatna. And Anindya is joining us from a hotel room in Washington, D.C. Anindya, congratulations on the book. So you're an optimist. You really think that AI is about to make the world a better place. Is that fair?
I think that's partially true. Andrew, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. What I would say is that here's how I think about AI. A lot of the narrative around AI has been primarily negative, where essentially I think people have engaged in this sort of fear mongering about the possibilities of AI, meaning like it'll take your jobs away, it'll cause discrimination, it'll cause unfairness, etc., etc. So very sort of dystopian view. And both Ravi and I think that's not a very accurate representation of reality, because between the two of us, we've spent almost 4 decades now working with a wide variety of companies in AI. And turns out there's a lot of upside, there's a lot of positive impact of AI. And so that's why we sort of started thinking about how do we compile all our experiences together, and maybe we should write a book about it. So that's how it came about.
Yeah, and we've had many critics, of course, of AI on the show, including Gary Marcus. I'm sure you've crossed swords with Gary. Everyone seems to have. He has a new book out, Taming Silicon Valley, How We Can Ensure That AI Works for Us. He's not very positive. And then this week we also had Marieczka Shark, a Stanford-based researcher whose book, The Tech Coup, is about how to save democracy from Silicon Valley. She thinks AI is a challenge to democracy itself. So, Anindya, you're an optimist. We've had this kind of optimism before about technology. We had it in the 90s about the internet revolution. We had it in the early 2000s about Web 2.0. We had it in the late 2000s about social media, and all those revolutions seem to have soured in many ways. Why is this one different? Why is this technology going to make us happier, richer, better, whereas the tech revolutions of the last 30 years have been very mixed, to say the least?
Right. I mean, I would also say that we are not dismissing the some of the negatives that has been talked about. I think the perspective that we're bringing in is like, let's make it a more balanced conversation, because we really just all hear about negativity about AI. And here's how I think about this. If you look at, you're right that there have been other general purpose technologies that have powered prior industrial revolution. Like think of electricity, right? Or think of just basic computing. Now, electricity and computing, the one advantage that they had is it's more of a visible, tangible, phenomena. Like you can switch on or off a light, and people can see what electricity is about. You can switch on or off a computer, and people can see what computing is about. But you can't really switch on or off AI, right? So AI is a lot more complex. It's layered. It's fundamentally intangible, which is why we get these very extreme narratives. It's either about complete dystopia or complete utopia. And our thinking is that the reality is different from perception. The reality is in the middle. And so that's why we should talk about what are the upsides of AI, and really more about how should organizations, how should companies, because to a lot of C-suite people that I often work with and interact with, because it's intangible, they don't quite know how to go about transforming their company with AI. And so, I think we are going to give them a roadmap through the book about how to take the company from wherever you are and make it a more, if not an AI driven, at least an AI transformed company.
Yeah, and that's really, I think, what the FT piece, I don't know if you saw it this morning, these AI powered assistants are certainly going to change corporations. Let's let's try and get our definitions straight in India. I'm sometimes confused exactly what AI is.
Mhm.
My understanding, for example, was that the Google search engine, which began in 1997, was based on AI. How would you define it, and and what role has it played so far, particularly in the digital revolution?
Yeah, so the simplest way of thinking of AI is it's a combination of software and algorithms that starts to mimic the intelligence and behavior of human beings. But obviously, there is a big difference in where human beings are today and where AI is today. So to going back to your question about Google search, sure, it was essentially an example of, let's call it, machine learning, which is one aspect of AI for sure, but it's not all AI. And so what's happening in Google search is that based on our input data and based on the content that's available on the internet, essentially these algorithms are trying to crawl a lot of the internet and see what's the most relevant set of results the search engine can spit out in response to a query, right? I think when you talk about digital revolution, I see lots of interesting examples where AI has been used already in some format, but there'll be a lot more use of this. And one of my favorites, and maybe this is because I'm a half marketer, is how do marketers and advertisers think about maximizing the return on their digital advertising campaigns, which can run into millions, if not more. So I see sort of a non-trivial and maybe a big role of AI in transforming everyday aspects of marketing and advertising.
The subtitle of your new book, Thrive, is maximizing well-being in the age of AI. So you're pretty bullish on this thing you call the age of AI. We've had this phrase before. In fact, people in the 80s and 90s even had
Mhm.
moments when they thought we were about to enter the age of AI. Then we went through what were known as these ice ages of AI. Is the current age of AI in India, was it begun by OpenAI and their pioneering GPT-3 LLM technology? Is that how our current age of AI should be defined? Or is there something more structural, more substantial than just one product and one company?
So I would say that the age, so in other words, post Chat GPT, right? As in about for 2 years now, I think let's call it AI has become more mainstream, where the average John Doe or Jane Doe is now aware of this thing called Chat GPT. They may have used it or not, but they're aware of it. So I think AI has become more mainstream now. It's, let's call it, less nerdy, less geeky, maybe a bit cool too, right? But I think LLMs are just one aspect of AI. So, in our book, we talk about this house of AI, a framework where essentially LLMs being a generative AI tool or capability is essentially just, one more arsenal as the company goes through this AI transformation journey. But I wouldn't call generative AI essentially just all of AI is not defined by Gen AI. So I think Gen AI is a very important pillar in AI, but AI is a lot more than Gen AI.
As you note, you begin your book talking about this thing you call the house of AI. I assume that's a
Yeah.
metaphor.
Yeah.
And the first chapter is entitled Everyone is Welcome in the House of AI. We've heard that one again in India before about everyone being welcome. Although, of course, currently AI is dominated by a tiny group of companies: Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, one or two others. I mean, even to play in the game, you need billions of dollars, Anthropic. What do you mean by the house of AI?
Okay, so this is one of my favorite topics. I might take a couple extra minutes, but here's what we think about this, right? So the question is, how does an organization today that is not really data driven? Okay, so one thing that Ravi and I learned over the last, again, several decades is, despite the ability and access to data, less than 1% of the data is actually being used by organizations for decision making. Okay. And one of the things we talk about is we explored this in length is why do organizations today who have tons of data, why do they still just use 1%? And we call this, the reason is we call it the three I's. Okay, the three I's are essentially inertia, lack of imagination, and essentially that leads to lack of innovation. Okay, so what does inertia mean? Like as the name suggests, essentially there's a lot of resistance we have felt over the years, even amongst the very top brass, to embark on this data driven decision making. So the inertia is like, hey, I have all the data but I'm not really super keen to embark on this journey. And we've tried to explore the whys of this. The lack of imagination is sometimes just ignorance. People don't know what they don't know. Okay, and so if you don't know what you're missing out, you are essentially not going to be able to have the sort of this the ability to overcome the inertia and imagine the possibilities. And essentially the lack of these three things means you're not going to innovate. Okay.
So thinking of the house of AI, to extend the metaphor in India, are you suggesting that corporations and perhaps individuals were all living in these very nice houses, beautiful bathrooms and kitchens and living rooms, but we're not really taking advantage of it?
I think that's part of it. Basically, you have the ingredients to build this house of AI, and the ingredients are people and data and the infrastructure, the technological infrastructure. Most companies have these three elements, but they're not really harnessing it. And so our house of AI provides them a framework. And the framework is that in the bottom layer is something called data engineering. In other words, you are essentially trying to spend enough time cleaning, curating, processing these raw, dirty data sets to make them, clean. That's like the very important input, because otherwise it's garbage in, garbage out, right? Then once you have those clean data sets, then you can impose four possible modeling or questions. The questions are very simple. What has happened so far? We call that descriptive. The next question is what will happen next? We call that predictive. The third question is why did something happen? That's called causal. And the last question is what should we do? And that's called prescriptive. So we have provided managers and executives with this roadmap where, based on the kind of question that you're trying to answer, you can hire the kind of people that you need to hire. Okay, so that's where like people come in, you have the data, then you have the people, and then finally, you have the infrastructure that is needed to harness the data and the people. That's what this roadmap is about.
Going back to the FT piece about this new generation of AI-powered assistants, it seems as if there's been a lot of hype, a lot of talk of AI, but there really aren't any products, easy to use products, so to speak, on the shelf. We're almost, it seems like in historical terms, we're at a pre-Netscape moment still in AI. Would you agree with that for the strategist at the kind of company that you're writing about that aren't using AI, the head of marketing, the head of business development? They're still mystified. They don't really know how AI can be used because the products aren't out there. There isn't the equivalent of a Netscape to go online on the internet and enjoy the World Wide Web.
I'm not quite sure I'll agree with that, because here's why. I mean, I'll give you like maybe three companies and their products in the space of marketing analytics that are now available for use. Okay, so people have heard of Adobe, they've heard of Meta, they've heard of Google. Now, in the
We've
case,
all heard of those three companies.
That's right, right? So each of these companies have now a commercially and sometimes even free available software for marketing analytics. They have interesting name. Like Google's product is called Meridian, and Meta's product is called Robin. Okay, these things are now out there, and so there should be no reason a priori for the marketing CMO or the marketing manager to have that inertia, which I was referring to before. These things are available. You can actually.
So what do they do? Give me an example. Let's use the Adobe one. I
Right.
use Adobe software all the time to edit this show in India.
Mhm.
What would I get out of whatever Adobe has? What's their product?
Okay, so imagine you are an advertiser like Nike. Nike is powering, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in TV campaigns,
Yeah.
in overhead billboard campaigns, in magazines, on social media, on the internet, all these display ad campaigns, video campaigns. Nike wants to figure out, and eventually, after these campaigns are unleashed and they see, let's say, a bump in their product sales, right? Sales go up for certain kinds of shoes. Which of those campaigns, which of those touch points, so to speak, TV, radio, internet, newspapers, magazines, social media, which was really instrumental in creating that lift, right? So they want to know this like every other advertiser so that they know in the next iteration where to slosh funds around, where to move their money around, right? And today, this is essentially called like media mix optimization. Today, all these companies, Adobe, Meta, and Google, they actually have released these AI-powered media mix optimization tools. And so, like
So,
anybody,
so what you're talking about then? I mean, I guess it's AI, but it's media analytics. It's
uh,
it's
yeah.
AI powered media analytics.
That's right. It's just basically these are models. They have been around in some form before, but today they're a lot more sophisticated and intelligent because they can harness these, humongous amounts of data often in real time, and advocate changes also often in real time. And both the precision and the computational speed that these products can deal with has just improved dramatically and more order of magnitude more.
You mentioned Facebook. A lot of people are very wary of Facebook. They've been involved in all sorts of scandals over the last 15, 20 years almost. There's, of course, the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Why would people trust a Facebook product when it comes to this? Facebook seems to be the company most associated with what Shoshana Zuboff at Harvard University calls surveillance capitalism. How can we be sure? You talk about data. How can we be sure that Facebook's products, its AI, isn't watching us?
Mhm. So I would say here's the good news. First of all, I mean, sort of, I disagree with what Shoshana had to say, but that's an aside. The good news is these products or the models I'm talking about, they're open source, and so you don't have to worry about sharing any, let's say, valuable piece of data or insight with any company. These are open source, meaning that you can download them, access them, and you can run all the analysis on your own computers. So if that's what if that's what somebody worries about, the good news is that not you shouldn't have to worry about that. So that's the good news.
Your book, the second chapter, after
Hmm.
you suggest that everyone is welcome in the house of AI, although you've got to understand it, you've got to be brave,
Hmm.
you got to be innovative. Your second chapter is on, or your second and third chapter is on finding love and fostering human connections. A lot of fear that these machines are about to replace us, make us redundant, not just as workers in India, but as
Hmm.
human beings in every sense, in terms of love and relationships. In Japan now, more and more AI powered objects are being used in terms of old people's relations with the world because they're so isolated. Tell me more about how AI can, to borrow some language from you, foster human connections and indeed find love, which we all want.
So one of my favorite example comes from the dating world. So dating apps, as you might know, they're basically deploying these recommender systems to figure out the match between a John Doe and a Jane Doe, or John Doe and another John Doe, right? So essentially, it's a match of attributes. What we found is that even something as seemingly as trivial as spelling mistakes on your dating profile can be pretty costly in helping you find your soulmate. So, to put some numbers, two spelling mistakes on your profile will reduce your probability of finding a match by 14%.
I hope you tell your students that they better use their dictionaries.
Yes, that's one of my favorite
And
examples.
actually, in all seriousness, and it doesn't that it's not so much the spelling mistakes, but what it tells you about someone, that they don't really care or they're not very literate. So everyone's trying to figure out what they're looking for, and a spelling mistake, like a bad photograph or an inappropriate comment, is something that will turn people off.
Yes, I mean, I think the underlying cause can be interpreted as the callousness or the lack of adequate effort in appearing prim and proper. And so, what we are now seeing is that a lot of these dating companies can essentially minimize or prevent that. So if they know that automatic spell checks as you type in your profile will minimize that, then they can promote that. And the problem with dating companies is that their recommender system, just to give you an analogy, recommender systems have been around in Amazon and Netflix and Spotify, right? But here's the big difference: when Amazon recommends a book, or Netflix recommends a movie, or Spotify recommends a song, you have to like the book, the movie, or the song, but the song or the movie or the book does not have to like you back. Whereas on a dating app, right, both sides have to like each other for the match to be successful. So the amount of AI based recommender systems that is being built in these companies is a lot more complex than, in fact, what's required in the likes of Netflix and Amazon or Spotify, even though those companies may be better known for use of AI.
So is this finding love and fostering human connections? Are you writing this for the data software architects at Match.com or Bumble, or are you writing it for people who are actually online using these services? Are you suggesting that people should find AI services in terms of finding love, or are you really writing for the corporations who are in the business of matching people?
I would say I think we're writing this more for the average person, who is about to who's curious to understand, like, what are the applications of AI in non-traditional spaces. So the fact that dating apps are using these similar models and machine learning algorithms to figure out the right match, and what they can do to increase the probability of a match, that's something we want to like make the average person aware. And another example of fostering connections is Airbnb, right? So in the sharing economy, Airbnb has essentially enabled strangers to meet up with each other and rent each other's places and get to know each other. So we in the book we talk a lot about even how Airbnb is now using significant parts of AI, to minimize issues that erupted before, like discrimination based on race or other demographic attributes. So that's another positive aspect of the use of these technologies.
So again, coming back to the FT piece about AI-powered assistance, what you're saying is that the exciting thing about AI when it comes to, say, matchmaking is that in the not too distant future, there should be bots that will coach individuals in what photograph they use and what they say and how they present themselves to the world. In the same sense, there'll be bots that will help someone renting a bedroom out on Airbnb. Is that the point? You're thinking of this really in marketing terms. I mean, you're a professor in many ways of marketing, so I guess that goes without saying.
Yes, in fact, not only that, these bots are going to be learning over time based on the actions that they recommend and the actual consequences they observe. So, these bots are going to be using various generative AI tools to reduce the probability of errors for the average person. Essentially ensuring a better match. And when there is a better match, these bots will be able to learn like what kind of content should the individual users actually be sharing about themselves. So again, end up in a successful match.
So, as you know, Anindya, love is a zero-sum game. I mean, not everyone can have it. It's not abundant. Will these bots tell an individual that they should dress better, or perhaps lose some weight, or perhaps become more interesting? Will they advise people on what photographs they should and shouldn't use? Can they be? Should we expect these bots to become actually rather brutal, perhaps like our parents?
So in theory, yes, these bots will be able to learn, what causes successful matches, and again, in theory, they can be transparent and brutal enough to recommend things that you may not want to hear about. So one of my favorite stories is actually related to this. Is Rush from the next chapter on health. And turns out that there was a series of experiments where we conducting the value of wearable technologies and the true impact of these AI powered mobile health apps and wearable technologies. Like, many of us wear like a wristband to figure out or quantify ourselves. And I can tell you more about that experiment in a second. But the bottom line is that when these bots in this experiment were recommending to people, hey, you've been pretty lazy for the last 1 week, go for 10,000 steps today, it's high time. While people appreciate the recommendation, they also complain that they were being judged. Okay, and so they complained that they were both pleased to see on one hand, an active recommendation, but they were also very unhappy that they were being judged by this so-called AI. So it's sort of a mixed feeling, so to speak.
Yeah, and I want to come to health in a second because I think that's one area where AI is going to be enormously influential. But in our culture, where everyone seems to be encouraged to celebrate themselves, and everyone is supposed to feel good about themselves, even if they feel more and more anxious and uncertain, does that go together with this AI that, as you say, can be rather brutal and honest? I mean, you can the data, as you might say, it doesn't lie. But our culture is one where, in some senses, we're encouraged, if not to lie, certainly to be very creative about ourselves. So some people say that you shouldn't fat shame. So even if you're radically overweight, it's not something that you should feel shameful about. On the other hand, I'm guessing on dating sites, if you're massively overweight, you might struggle to find a date.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of what you raised an interesting question, which is when this recommendation is coming through an AI powered bot, what sort of nudge will be more effective? Okay, so in sort of behavioral economics, there's two kinds of nudges: nudge and a sludge. A nudge is sort of a positive sounding, reinforcing behavior reinforcing message. A sludge, on the other hand, could be something that points out what's wrong with you, and even though it's accurate, people may not like to hear that, the negative judgment from this AI bot. So we are actually now in the process of testing out in both scenarios using randomized control treatments. Are nudges more effective than sludges in eliciting certain actions from consumers or patients in the case of healthcare? I think the jury is still out there, but it's something that's very fascinating to me in particular. Along with my co-authors, we're actually exploring this through experiments.
And it's enormously important in terms of politics. We've done a number of shows on the political implications of nudge in behavioral economics when it comes to state behavior.
Right.
So you probably don't have a chapter on this, but certainly the role of AI in government policy and government decision making and programs is enormously important. You do have a chapter on AI health. We've had Robert Pearl on the show many times, the former CEO of Kaiser Permanente out here, one of the most influential thinkers and writers on the future of the American health system. He's pretty optimistic, bullish on AI, and it's not hard to see why and how. How do you see AI changing American healthcare, which, of course, in many ways, depending who you listen to, is in crisis?
So maybe, I mean, I would sort of narrow it down in sort of broader healthcare, maybe like two examples, two extreme, two unique cases. One is cancer detection, and one is just like, health, like wellness and health, right? So one interesting story about cancer detection is that in Hungary, in this country in Europe, right, that we've all heard of, there are these clinics known as mama clinics, where they're basically in the business of, let's say, detecting cancer, right? And or breast cancer in particular. So it turns out that an analysis revealed that there were 22 cases where human doctors actually missed out on the fact that this individual is about to become a cancer patient, but the AI algorithm, who was essentially taking the place of the radiologist, was able to make that inference. Okay, so there's 22 people who now, let's say, owe their lives, at least some probability of surviving, to this AI that was replacing the radiologist. And there's 41 other cases under scrutiny where it seems like human beings made mistakes, but AI did not. So I like that story because it's a small sliver or the tip of the iceberg of what's possible with AI replacing certain human abilities. The other one that I was referring to just a short while ago is this this question about a lot of these wearable technology companies and mobile health app companies have released all these, call them devices or gadgets or apps that lets people monitor their sleeping, their nutrition, their exercise. And yet there was no study that actually quantified whether people actually changed their behavior in response to all of those quantification that they were doing. Okay, so many of us, we track our sleeping, our eating, our exercise, but are you actually changing your behavior as a consequence? And the answer we found after 15 months of experimentation, we did find that at least for chronic disease patients of diabetes and like blood pressure and sugar, we did find a statistically significant effect that people do change their behavior across all three dimensions.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think JD Vance touched on this in one of his recent conversations on American healthcare.
Mhm.
AI will make our behavior more and more visible. So the question is, should people who live a healthy lifestyle be paying the same as people who don't? And AI will enable the healthcare providers, the insurance companies, maybe even the state to do that. So going back to, you said you're not a big fan of Zuboff's surveillance capitalism, but won't this AI revolution give government the tools to be able to, for example, in healthcare, know whether people are exercising,
Mhm.
whether they're overeating, whether they're not sleeping enough, and in that sense, be able to, you use these words, nudge and sludge, but reward people whose lifestyles are healthy in terms of giving them more affordable healthcare?
Yeah, you raise a really interesting question. And I think this question leads to what I call, at least personally for me, an ethical dilemma. So, after we published this study in one of the top journals in our field, I got calls from like insurance companies and similar institutions saying, hey, we are trying to personalize insurance premium in the sense that by tracking people who exercise more, sleep longer, and eat better, we should reward them with lower premium. And conversely, people who exercise less, sleep less, and eat not as nutritious food, we should penalize them. And they were interested in exploring an active, maybe some sort of a commercial relationship with us, the co-authors of this paper, and maybe monetize our algorithms. And that's where I struck the line. I decided not to pursue this for the following reason. What I went back and told them that what makes me uncomfortable with your proposition, although I know technologically you can do it, is the following. There's a big correlation between income and the ability to sleep longer, eat nutritious food, and exercise more. Simply put, rich people have more disposable time and disposable money to do all those good things, and the poor do not. So I don't want to be, personally, I don't want to be part of a solution where the rich get rewarded for essentially being rich, and the poor get penalized for being poor. So that said, even though we decided not to pursue that commercial collaboration, I think honestly, realistically, it's a matter of time before somebody else does it.
Yeah, I
Because
think you're thinking alike with Shoshana Zuboff on that front. And same, of course. I mean, the insurance industry seems to me, as a consumer, to be a massive crisis. I'm always amazed that it's not a bigger political issue. It's because American politics is so absurd and theatrical and all the rest of it. But shouldn't this also work when it comes to driving, for example, in India? That data will enable car insurance companies to know exactly how, and especially as people drive more and more network cars, that they'll know exactly how fast they're driving, how well they're driving, and then insurance can be tailored to that too.
So I think that's already happening. At least I'm aware of a couple of case studies of a company like Geico, and I think it was Allstate that did that. I believe it was in Kansas or Texas, one of those states, where they did install tracking codes under the windshields of the drivers. And where they drew the line is if you're a good driver, like you're not swerving and changing lanes all the time, you're staying within 55 or 65, etc., you do get lower insurance premium. But if you're not following those instructions, your premium doesn't go up, it stays the same. So in a way, there's a discount to good drivers, but there is no penalty for, let's say, bad drivers. But they did try that.
I'm guessing, Anindya, that your new book, Thrive, Maximizing Wellbeing in the Age of AI, will get snapped up by a lot of strategic marketing people and insurance companies. It's a fascinating issue. Let's get to the end. You talk about work, career, fulfillment, the AI enhanced home. How is this going to change our lives? Clearly, already the way you're presenting it, it will. We're going to be analyzed, watched, we'll have access perhaps to these
Mhm.
tools that will make us more attractive on the dating market. It will affect our healthcare, our car insurance. Is this going to shape profoundly mid 21st century life, thinking ahead 20 or 30 years? You mentioned the electricity revolution at the beginning of the show. That, of course, defined the industrial age. Are we on the brink of an AI age where this data technology is going to change everything and how we live?
I think it'll change many things. I like to think of AI today as where the internet was in the late 90s, right? So we went through a pretty significant dot-com boom and a bust before we realized what's really important and effective and what's not. So I suspect we're going to go through a little bit of the learning cycle, but it's going to be much faster than what happened 25 years ago, just because what we our mistakes and our successes through AI, we learn these things much faster. But we are definitely in the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the amount of our understanding of what these things can do. But the reason I like this analogy is because I think at the end, the internet was a great revolution that changed our lives collectively for the better. That includes social and mobile and everything else that accompanied internet later on. And I think AI has that power where we're going to see enough and maybe more upside than downside.
Yeah, but there will be downside. You're currently in DC. You do a lot of stuff on the regulation front. You're an expert in dealing with government agencies. And India, Gary Marcus, as I said, I'm sure you're familiar with his work. He
Mhm.
believes that there needs to be some much more aggressive regulation on the AI front, although he's not entirely reliant on AI. And Mariana Schalker also agrees. Are there areas where you feel that government needs to catch up with Silicon Valley and actually aggressively regulate it before it regulates us? I mean, you talked about us being at the stage in the late 90s in terms of the history of the internet. I think if we look back then, some of the problems with the internet could have been addressed had they been regulated back then. And companies like Google in particular seem to be always one step ahead of the regulators. Maybe they've caught up now on this antitrust stuff. But what areas do you think? I appreciate the fact that you're generally an optimist and you think it will make the world a better place. But I'm guessing you think that there is some areas where AI needs to be regulated and government itself needs to shape the world that's about to come into being.
Yeah, I mean, I think regulation is always a complex topic, and maybe personally, I guess I'm a tad bit cautious about the need and importance of regulation. And just to give you some insight, I think that's partly because I feel like while regulation can be important in some areas and sometimes, but we also have to be careful not to stifle innovation that can come about. That being said, I would say that one interesting area where we could probably have some sort of laws in place is this issue of who owns the content that is being used to train all these large language models, right? And should there be a transfer of surplus between a company that is producing a large language model and the company whose content is being trained on? Okay. So it's less relevant to maybe companies like Meta or Hugging Face that have open source, non-commercial products, but maybe more relevant to companies like OpenAI and Microsoft that have commercially viable and I would say maybe even thriving LLM products, right? So these companies they train all their algorithms on content that belongs to a whole wide variety of
Yeah,
companies.
and it's a particularly sensitive issue for the creative community, for artists, for writers, filmmakers, because many people are suing these companies because they believe that the algorithms have essentially stolen their content. In fact, I
Mhm.
think the New York Times has a case currently against OpenAI. So this is more than just an intellectual issue, it's an economic one too.
Yeah, the issue of fair use versus copyright violation, I think it's going to be the one of the biggest issues that somebody a regulatory body may have to weigh in or deal with at some point. So I think that would be an example where we might be better off with some sort of government mandate on what's legit and what's not.
Well, that's good stuff. Good moderate stuff from Anindya Ghose, very distinguished professor at New York University. He's co-author of a new book, Thrive: Maximizing Wellbeing in the Age of AI. It's coming out at the beginning of October, but you can order it now. Congratulations, Anindya, on the book. And we'll have to get you back on the show. This is certainly not an issue that's going away. So thank you so much. And again,